I got a chance to write a letter to the writers, and I want to just share the first line. It's, "Dear writers, thank you for your spirit and creation, your archive of legacy, your power as a cohort, and each in your own in critical awareness, formal curiosity, challenging everyday perception for a dynamic and courageous investigation of truth." I am so honored to be introducing our writers here today. Our first reader is Christy Song. Christy Song is a Chinese-American writer, journalist, and illustrator from Southern California. She is a graduate student at UC Berkeley and is usually thinking about lost memories, childhood scraps, and her multilingual upbringing for her stories. Thank you for reading for us tonight, Christy.
Thank you so much for the introduction, EJ. I'm really grateful and honored to be a part of this year's cohort, and I'm just so thankful to EJ and to the team at Jack Straw, and also to everyone in my cohort because they're so talented and they motivate me to keep writing and keep digging into my stories. And today I wanted to read one short story and one poem that I wrote for the Jack Straw anthology this year. And they both sort of probe my grappling with being a Chinese American person, and specifically with having mainland Chinese heritage and Cantonese heritage. And so with the different dialects and cultural intersections that happen between those two regions of one country, it's something that really puzzles me and sort of fuels my passion to write. And so the first story is called Goldfish Granny. I never learned her real name. She lived in a grand home with a lacquered brown door and a fish tank brimming with puffy red cichlids. Her floors were wooden and glossy, and I would lie on them for hours at a time, thinking of ways I could speak to the fish. With unblinking eyes, they'd approach me from behind the glass and sing bubbles into the water, their pouts opening and closing. "Yu," they said, "yu, yu, yu." Well, I'd respond, "Me, me, me." After I learned how to introduce myself to them, I'd spend the rest of the afternoons trailing Goldfish Granny. While she tended to the weeds in her garden, I searched for stones and hid the smoothest ones in her pockets. That way, she wouldn't miss me when I had to go home for the day. It would plop out at bedtime, and she would know that I'd been thinking of her. I hoped she knew this. Most afternoons, she would tuck me into bed and brush the hair from my eyes, letting the sunlight trickle into my lids as I fell asleep. After an hour, I'd wake to the sound of the blender and the sweet smell of banana and milk, her way of showing me she'd missed me too. After sipping at the froth and then gulping down the rest, I'd kiss the jade bracelet at the bedside table and join Goldfish Granny at the front step. She'd help me slip into a jacket while I fumbled with my shoelaces, glancing at the fish as they laughed at my shoddy efforts. We'd walk hand in hand to the grocery store a few blocks away, sharing this bit of warmth as the sun sank lower into the sky. I'd count the lines on the ground, gripping her hand tight to hurl myself over the larger cracks. The first time we entered the market, the fish were large and gray, and several were crammed into a single rectangular tank. They butted heads and slapped at one another, mouths gaping and pleading, but I couldn't understand them. Sometimes I'd cry, spluttering, "I don't know, I don't know." I didn't know how to end their misery, so I would weep into Granny's stomach while pointing at them. Maybe she knew how to comfort them, just as she knew more Cantonese, knew how to make banana milk, knew how to clean dirt beneath my fingernails, and how to say "good child" in a way that made me feel like I was born from her own blood. But she'd forgotten how to speak to the sea the same year she left home and moved into this landlocked country. So we rushed to the other aisles and picked out lemon tea, sausages for clay pot rice, green onions, and chicken for soup. After shelling out a few bills, she stuffed the leftover coins into my pocket, and we walked home in silence. I counted out 2 quarters, a dime, and 3 nickels. their weight the same as the stones I collected for Goldfish Granny. When my parents arrived at nightfall, I bid goodnight to the cichlids. I pressed my hands to my cheeks, mirroring the open-mouthed way they gawked at me, and said, 再见, 再见, we'll meet again. For Granny, I said, I will miss you. On the car ride home, I foraged my jean pockets for the jangling coins, my treasure, and instead fished out a smooth sliver of granite. In Wo, there is you. Ni, ni, ni. And I have one more poem to share, and it's called In the Small Hours Before Dawn. And it's dedicated to my father's home city, which is Harbin in northern China. In the small hours before dawn, your mother wakes early to prepare breakfast downstairs, 8 treasure porridge that she stirs in the dark, the loneliest woman in the world. In the early morning, your father leaves to visit Yeye across the street, smoke in one hand, breakfast in the other. You can hear cars on the street now. The world is alive again. In the morning, we stroll through the outdoor market and eat buns filled with fried egg and minced pork. I follow you to school, say hello again and again when your classmates ask me to speak English. When a bell rings announcing morning exercises, I stand frozen as the national anthem begins to play. You swing your arms with ease, singing along, 起来, 起来, 起来. I can't, I whisper. I can't, I can't, I can't. In the afternoon, we sneak cold plums to your room and spit the pits into our palms during these hot summer afternoons. Forehead pressed against forehead, we share secrets and fasten our hearts to stories that transport us to places beyond the bunk bed we share. In the evening, we run through mazes filled with abandoned ping pong tables and scorched cigarette butts. We run until we reach the corner of the city and dive into the mouth of the river that everyone calls Mother. At night, we sit by Mother River and watch people dance to Russian folk music. A woman in green twirls, her arms extended above her head. Under the streetlight, I watch her spin and spin and spin, and in this kaleidoscope of light and motion, she is smiling. At midnight, I lie listening to the murmur of your heart and our home. Though my tongue is stilted in disjointed cadence for words I do not yet hold in my chest, I match my breathing to yours to say that I will not forget you. Thank you.
Woo! It's always that moment of pause to unmute ourselves. But thank you, Kristie. Wow, I remember us talking about the way you use language to become things, and how the things in your stories and poems become language, like the stone. And I love the repetition of wo, 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 and then the ni, the you coming in after. So wow, and plus I love banana milks.
Me too.
That have nothing to do with anything, but thank you for bringing the grief out of banana milk. But thank you so much, Kristie. I'm going to introduce our next reader, Erin Batiste. So excited to introduce Erin. Is an interdisciplinary poet, storyteller, and author of the chapbook Glory to All Fleeting Things. She is a 2021 Jerome Emerging Artist at the Anderson Center, and this year she is also a writer in residence at the studios at Mass MoCA, Prairie Ronde at the Mill at Vicksburg, and the Helene Wurlitzer Foundation. And she is the recipient of fellowships from Paraplus, Jackstraw Riders, and the Dots Between. Her other recent honors include fellowships and support from Cave Canem, Breadloaf Writers Conference, Rana Jaffe Foundation, Crosstown Arts, and Callaloo. Batiste is a reader for the Rumpus and her own pushcart Best New Poets and Best of the Net nominated poems are anthologized and appear internationally in Michigan Quarterly Review, Porto del Sol, and Wildness, among other decorated journals. Welcome, Erin. So excited to hear you read tonight.
Thank you, EJ, and thank you to Jackstraw Writers To my amazing cohort, it's been weird and fun getting to know you all through the screen, especially my homies Greg and Tachuku. This goes out to you. So I'm going to start with two of my poems from the anthology. They're from a series, Appellation, which has several definitions, but that means name and also a calling. So all of these poems start with the letter S, like my own name. Appellation, Stephanie. Stephanie, name. Definition of Stephanie. 1A1, Greek moniker meaning a crown or garland. 2, crowned in victory, victorious. 3, the crowned one. 4, heavy lies the crown. 2A1, women with this name tend to be good at analyzing and understanding. 2, women with this name are most successful as scholars, philosophers, or mystics. B, their solitary thoughtfulness may make them appear melancholy. C, women with this name deeply desire love and companionship. D, introverted. 3A1, popular name given to girls during the decades of the 1970s to 1990s, ranked number 13 in 1980. 4A1, a good interview name. B1, the girl her father loved before her mother. 2, the girl her father loved more than her mother. 3, the girl her father loved after her mother. 4, the girl her mother did not love. 5, the girl her sister hated. 6, once upon a time, the girl. 7, the girl. C1, a wayward daughter. D1, someone who leaves, someone who is always leaving. Synonyms, noun. Black, bitch, spinster, witch, acclaim, storyteller, scavenger, survivor, traitor, recipe, goddess, an example. Synonyms, adjective. Beautiful, resourceful, full, dressed well, lush, shallow, selfish, childish, childless, pessimistic, stunning, abundant, overdramatic, creative, eccentric, coroneted, quirky, weird, not from here, tired, tried, vain, longing, lonely, alone. Synonyms, verb. Create, claim, indulge, flourish, shine, glow, wander, reclaim, abandon, leave, relinquish, divest, surrender, reckon, coronate, cease, succeed. Antonyms, noun. Wife, mother, martyr, target, victim. Near antonyms, verb. Belonging, embraced, claimed, understood. This is the second from the Appellation series that I'll be sharing tonight. The series is ongoing, so I have many more S names, and this one has an epigraph. Salome. Then I have done well in not bringing forth. And Mary begat Salome, and Salome begat, and Salome begat, and Salome begat. Say, you are born this time a virgin, one of 3. Say, you start a believer. You are pious, dutiful, suited to follow. Your name follows your mother. Your second name follows peace. Say, you are anointed. Your spices anoint chosen men. But let's say you suffer selfishness. You, daughter, choosing only to anoint yourself. Let's say this life you are indulgent. Say you do follow his dying orders. So say you do dance and devour every pasture. Say that nothing will ever fill you. Say then you turn to gorge your own sorrow. Then say you feast upon their shame. You are not sorry for your loneliness. It is true, you are alone. You are lustful in your aloneness. Say you are naked, not nameless. Say there was no bitterness found in your body, only your one withered hand which held yourself. Say you never believed them. Say you were a vessel which held only your own glorious sins. And I have 3 new poems. One of these we looked at in a workshop with a cohort, and I changed one word at the suggestion of EJ that I had a repetition, and when I went to deal with the document, it opened up the poem in the form, and I rewrote it. And so thank you to EJ and cohort, and it's dedicated to my father, whose 20th year death anniversary was this Valentine's Day. No trees I could name. Were there blackberry trees on the ride to the cemetery where they lowered my father into his grave? Would my sister clutching her thrift store purse? Would my mother on her 4th husband? Would either have managed to look up, have known what to look for, have considered wintertime flowers or fruit wearing a purpled hue of death? Did they leave a mark on that day the way they stain my memory now? 15 years later, there were no trees I could name. My cousin makes the same drive, this time me, strange and silent in a car. I am fresh off another airplane, and as he detours exiting the familiar freeway, teases, let's make a game of finding my father's headstone. We never do. My cousin rattles on as the city falls all around me. I think of him alone, there in that watery coffin. Think of my daddy, who only wanted daughters, more road trips, and Disneyland, and sunshine. Think how I am his première fille. Think how he proudly picked my first and middle names. Think how I have seen Seattle several times now, how so many Valentine's days have passed, and I am too ashamed to ask anyone where he rests. Later that trip, I pile with my uncle's family into the same sedan to cremate the same cousin's grandmother. I do not recognize any leaves or promises of blooming. By the time we arrive, she is already in a box, her small body coupled with her favorite life-size doll. Closed, it looks like a cardboard wardrobe meant for hanging and moving clothes. The young morticianess notices our surprise, tells us how this is her dream job, how she decided to deliver grief when she was a girl. I had shown up for the grandmother and her doll, but she is not my blood, has not taught me how to jump rope, never repaired my scraped knees, on no occasion baked cookies or my birthday carrot cake. Still, I wonder if they have bothered to dress her. Wonder, has anyone brushed and braided her lacy white hair? Remember the grandmother's face sunflowered as she described how the wind swung my father's wool blazer. She had prayed psalms for a clean heart. Remember how much her daughter resented that doll, hated all her mother's dainty painted daughters sitting on decorative chairs in their Lake Washington house. Wonder, is my aunt hiding a smirk while the flames join plastic and flesh together, the only sound masking the slow murmur of rain? I have a couple more. This one is a form. It's dedicated to my friend Katie Willingham. We're co-writing a chapbook together where we've co-written a bunch of prompts, and we're writing the same poems, but different poems because we're different poets. So yay, friendship, and competition is not a real thing. And this is in an abecedarian form, meaning that each letter of each line begins with a letter of the alphabet in alphabetical order. Notes from workshop, an abecedarian. Because the poem is aggressive and angry, always aflame at some loss or another. Because the poem is bewildering and bitchy, even to witches. Because the poem is a cyclone of syllables, impossible for most mouths to pronounce. Because the poem is demanding readers show up for its downpour of words disappointment, darkening and depressing the white space beneath it. Because the poem is eccentric with its loud flowering prints and rising signs, embarrassing episode, too elegiac. Because the poem is fatalistic, it is crying over someone dying, fragile, feral, a funeral, a failure. Because the poem is gardenless, like the poet, it refuses to cultivate, decorate, or at least prune. Because the poem is heartbroken, so many Christophers have exited without looking back, hateful now. Because the poem is immature, she names names and carries her childhood around like a ratty sweater. Because the poem is juvenile, it seems to want to indict the mother. Because the poem is kitschy, chock full of deranged dolls and plastic cactuses and cartoon versions of High Noon, appears to know it all. Because the poem is lonesome, all these poems are lonesome. Because the poem is melodramatic, it plays out and replays the most mundane everydayness. Because the poem is a nobody, a nothing, not a poem. The workshop silently turns its pages over and moves on. Because the poem is obsessive, it fills itself with lists and dates like adolescent diary entries, over emotional. Because the poem is privileged, the poet too, its pretentiousness is already expected, a petty pity parade. Because the poem is questionable, it assumes all manner of vulgar margins and quirky shapes. Because the poem is resentful and repetitive, its refrain eventually becomes a weapon. Because the poem is selfish, it does not consider outside its own small, sad atmosphere. Because the poem is tired, is trivial, is temperamental, talks only of old hauntings. Because the poem is undisciplined, it does not write its morning pages and is sluggish to revise. Because the poem is violent, the white woman who hangs herself in it takes up too much attention. Because the poem is weird, wild daughter, nobody wished for, it tumbleweeds from town to town. Because the poem is xerophytic, it does not require your watery platitudes, nor does it need to earn its ending. Because the poem is yelling, and if not, the next poem will, its meaning may be missed entirely. Because the poem is zealous over extraterrestrials and laden with conspiracy, this poet should seek a professional soon. Thank you for listening, everyone. I have one more, and it is a pandemic poem, and I will show you guys the trick when I'm done. Thank you so much to my cohort, to EJ and to Jackstraw, writers, and to everyone here on a Friday night hearing poems and writing. Reincarnation. Before everything was swept into one relentless spring, dueling for rolls of bounty in big box aisles, fearing death, overhearing a parking lot sneeze, trembling over headlines, hospitalizations, surges in new cases, new deaths. There was this. We were careless in cafes and sidewalks and mourning, palms all gripping the same slick express train pillars, the other steadying the greased pages of a used book. More than once, even I confessed to touching the lid of my lavender latte, unwashed fingertips sweaty with the city and anticipation. So freely we gathered into bars, bookstores, and brunches just to listen to somebody else belt out all their private disappointment while we poured our work weeks over chocolate-flavored happy hour specials and sushi. We held each other's puffer coats and swampy scarves and bathroom lines, not pressed to distinguish if the stranger's face there beside us was flushed with fever or shyness. On good days, we locked eyes with every commuter the escalator opposite ours, and sometimes even bared our teeth into some half-hearted attempt at connection. There was connection. Still, we flaked on birthdays, started to concoct excuses to get out of Christmas this year at the first hint of 3-day beach weekends, sun timely and reliably bright back then. Decades of we promise the next holiday lies stretch like miles. How could we have known that history was upon us? That history is, as it was always, alive and ravenous and doggedly plotting itself out. That we would be the ones whatever ones came afterwards would read about, would sneer recoil at our collective horrors and toilet paper hoards, at the puzzling ways we'd made the plague fashion, wrung our sanitized hands awash in worry at the news and news of news. How frail our loneliness. We hesitated cautiously, 6 feet apart, no longer staring into nor desiring eyes of other covered faces. How we would long for salty potato salad and polite weather talk and window shopping and wandering at festivals, seeking solstice oils and geode pendants, declared non-essential now. How before we'd spend every 5-day cycle yearning to be returned to our small worlds and cramped apartments until we became reduced to them, until all we had left was our shared universes online, one-dimensional, as far as we could tell, where we crowd together, reincarnated here into brilliant millions of tiny pixelated frames. Thank you, and it's in Zoom squares. Thank you for listening, everyone.
Oh, as Erin, I love those Zoom squares that you showed at the last second too. I was like, hello, I want to see. Oh, I almost interrupted your reading at halfway because I wanted to clap so loud. I think somebody was saying we miss the sounds, the audience, the murmuring, the gasp. And I was doing so much of that on my end. So thank you for that reading. And I don't know I know others feel the same. Every time I hear you read your poem, I feel like crying. I mean, I was like, this is live. Don't start bawling and I can't go on. So thank you. I mean, I can't. Oh, and just one more thing, the words that come together. And I remember in workshop how we're doing edits and revisions for your work, and all of our mouths dropped and we just had no feedback for you. We had to so hone in on something, but thank you for being a part of this cohort. I'm so excited to introduce our next amazing reader. José Luis Montero is passionate about storytelling regardless of the medium. After dabbling in radio, photography, and filmmaking, he recently turned his artistic attention toward the written word, both in English and Spanish. He earned a certificate in literary fiction from University of Washington and a master in narrative from Escuela de Escritores in Madrid. He worked as a production intern for Copper Canyon Press, and for a couple of years served as president of Seattle Escribe, a nonprofit promoting Spanish literature in Washington state. Currently, he serves on the board of Seattle City of Literature and is an assistant editor of poetry for Narrative Magazine. Wow. So thank you so much for reading, Jose. I was going to say Pepe. We also call him Pepe.
You can call me Pepe. Thank you very much, EJ, and the rest of the Jockstraw team for your support and the opportunity to be here tonight. For a long time, I've been keeping an eye on Jockstraw Writers Program. Many of my favorite local writers have been part of it at some point or another, so I am profoundly humbled to have been selected for this cohort this year. Thank you very much. And today I'm going to be reading the beginning of a new project I'm writing in English, and it's called Uprooted. And Uprooted is a series of lyrical vignettes that straddle the limits between the past and the present, short fiction and memoir, English and Spanish. And these vignettes explore the idea of relocation and displacement as allegories of the process of self-discovery. The story takes place between the United States and Mexico, where I'm originally from, and from where I happen to be reading tonight. And I will read a few of the vignettes that open this project, and I hope this will become a full-fledged book, and I really hope you do enjoy it. I was born in the port of Mazatlan, inside room 203 of the Divina Providencia Hospital, located 4 blocks away from the beach, 3 from the cathedral, two from my family's ancestral home, where my parents buried my umbilical cord, and only one street away from the house where I plan to spend my golden years. If there's anything I've learned during 4 long decades of spreading my branches across the vastness of this world, is that no matter how high your canopy grows, no matter how far your twigs reach, your roots will always remain buried under the same soil. Names are crucial to our identity. They're imbued with meaning and history. They're part of our legacy. My name is José Luis, like my father, but family and friends have always called me Pepe. And not because of that smug cartoon character Pepe Le Pew. The nickname actually comes directly from the Bible. The Catholic Church, concerned about the possibility of Joseph being confused for the biological father of Jesus, added a footnote whenever his name was mentioned in the scriptures to ensure readers knew he was only Jesus' putative father. The moniker Padre Putativo was too long to reproduce in paper, so it was abbreviated as PP, which in Spanish is pronounced Pepe, and that's how all Josés got their nickname. In the Spanish-speaking world, everyone has 2 official last names, the father's, then the mother's, in that order. When I came to the United States, my mother's last name was suppressed from all official documents. This was unsettling for her. With a mouse click, the legacy of her family was wiped away, and as much as I regretted it, I acquiesced to the local custom. At the same time, people at work started calling me José. The lack of the accent I actually didn't mind. What really bothered me was the missing Luis. In Spanish, any name that starts with Maria or José becomes a compound first name that is pronounced as a single word, emphasizing the accent on the second name. Names like José Luis or Maria Elena are pronounced José Luis, and Maria Elena in the same manner that Mary Ann and Billy Joe are pronounced as a single word. It felt strange to be called José at first, but I was a guest in this country and I didn't feel right to lecture people on the intricacies of Spanish names, so I just got used to it. Truth was, I never liked the name José on its own. José Luis was fine, but I always harbored the wish that my parents had named me Luis, after my grandfather. He passed away when my dad was a teenager, and I'm told that I take after him in so many ways. Both of us came to the United States at a very young age, learned English, and picked up the American customs of the time. Despite growing up under the influence of rural surroundings, both of us were city rats to the core and enjoyed the modern world pleasures. Also, neither of us could stand to sport our fingernails short. A few months ago, researching my family tree online, I came across my grandfather's baptism certificate and uncovered a secret. He was actually baptized as José Luis, and his grandfather's name was Luis as well. But looking at census records, I also learned that he signed his name as Luis O. Montero, the letter O in honor of his mother's last name, Osuna. No one in the family has ever been able to explain convincingly why he did any of this. Perhaps he had a penchant for rewriting his own story, for crafting his own narrative. Perhaps, deep inside, he was also a storyteller, just like me. Apparently, the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree, indeed. Every Sunday, my father would take us for a ride to one of the nearby rural towns. He called this ranchal. We would pick a nice but inexpensive restaurant to have lunch, then spend the afternoons exploring the dirt roads that connected the ranchitos dotting the region. Often, we would stop at small farms to buy seasonal fruits, like mangoes, guamuchiles, or Mexican plums. Sometimes we'd stumble upon a small creamery and bought queso fresco or queso oreado. If we were lucky, we'd find a rural bakery and eat some pan de rancho, the most delicious bread in the world, made with farm eggs, butter, and milk, organicos before the term was even coined. We would drive back late in the afternoon just in time for twilight. The view from atop the high bridge that crossed into the city was always a majestic sight. The sky flared with an intensity I had yet to see anywhere else. The yellows gave way to the reds, then the pinks, and then the purples over a carpet of clouds that stretched all the way to the horizon. As we crossed the bridge and admired the sunset, my father would start singing "Que me importa," an old Cuban bolero from the 1940s, made popular by Mario Fernández Porta. Los ojos del sol se han cerrado y con ellos se ha ido la luz. De violeta se viste la tarde porque pronto la noche vendrá. Then, invariably, I would start singing the chorus. ¿Qué me importa que la lluvia caiga despiadadamente? ¿Qué me importa que el sol y la luna no quieran salir? At the end, we would all sing in unison as we drove to the streets and made our way home. Si mi alma será solo tuya por toda la vida, ¿qué me importa que todo se acabe si me quedas tú? We would arrive just in time for the last hour of Siempre en Domingo, a weekly variety show that all of Mexico watched together, because back then, we really had only one TV channel, and in our small town, there was nothing else to do on a Sunday evening. In the dark, under the scintillating flicker of our old cathode ray tube television, showing all those Mexican startlets, we never realized that those moments together were truly magical, irreplaceable, that once I grew up, once I left my hometown in my country of birth, we would never be able to replicate that tenderness, that sense of togetherness that made us feel like a family. Just like that old bolero song, we didn't realize that once the aurora had gone and everything had ended, our souls still belonged together, even if there were no luminaries left to light our way to eternity. Plants are wise and more attuned to nature than we could ever be. If there's one thing I learned from them, it's that you may abandon the soil of your motherland, but your motherland never abandons you. When I was little, there was no nurseries or commercial seeds available in our hometown. Instead, people acquired plants by trading plant cuttings. Poditos, we called them. My parents were experts at this. Wherever we went, Mom searched for interesting plants and negotiated exchange, while Dad nursed the poditos and planted them in our garden. Mom preferred flowers, but Dad believed plants had to bear fruit to justify the effort. For him, flowers were beautiful, but beauty never fed anyone. Our house had a big yard with an assortment of tropical fruit trees. There were soursops, Mexican plums, avocados, chico zapotes, nanches, lychees, coconuts, mangoes, and multiple guava trees. Guavas were always my favorite, and despite not being his, Dad planted every single variety he found. Wild guavas, pineapple guavas, strawberry guavas, giant guavas, even pear-looking guavas. Our relatives joked that the only area devoid of plants was a perimeter wall. Luckily for Mom, grapes did not grow in our region, and my parents didn't know of any other climbing plants that bear fruit. So, each time she laid her eyes on an enredadera with beautiful flowers, she could negotiate to get a podito and ask my dad to plant it there. She was particularly proud of her llamarada, a bindweed that produced a cascade of small orange blooms that looked like the botanical equivalent of a blaze, and her copa de oro with its big yellow trumpet-shaped flowers. When an out-of-town relative gifted my dad with a podito of passion fruit enredadera from Brazil, he became really excited about the possibility of harvesting fruta de la pasión, instead of settling for a bunch of copas de oro. As he nursed the podito, he envisioned the exotic jams and the tropical marmalades But as soon as the passion fruit was planted in the dirt, the foliage wilted and the vine died. Abuelita, an even better gardener than my dad, declared that the passion fruit remembered the soil it came from and withered in sorrow. Even plants have motherlands, and no matter how far away a plant may travel, foliage still remembers. Thank you very much.
Oh no, you can only hear mine. Everyone, only mine. Thank you so much, Pepe. Wow, I got a chance to, we all got a chance to read it before, but to hear you read the whole thing, and I always know the song is coming, and I feel like every time I'm so surprised by it and how it lingers. It's still playing as you keep going, and all our souls belonging together, all the soil that we each belong to. So thank you so much, Pepe.
Thank you, EJ.
Our last reader tonight already is Greg November. Oh, I'm so excited for everyone to hear you, Greg. Originally from the Northeast, Greg November has called the Northwest his home since 2010. He earned his MFA at UC Irvine and teaches writing at North Seattle College and Highline College. His stories have appeared most recently in Boulevard, Carve, Epiphany, and Juked. He reads submissions for New England Review and was a finalist for the 2020 Kirk Johnson Prose Award in Fiction. Thank you, Greg. So excited to hear your work.
Thank you, EJ. Yeah, what a wonderful event. I'm so happy to be part of this. Kristie and Pepe and Erin, you guys this has been so great. So thank you for your words, your thoughts, all your good stuff. I'm going to read the story that is in the Jack Straw anthology. The story, like everything I've been writing recently, whether I wanted to or not, is about parenting. And even if I set out to write something not about parenting, it ends up about parenting. So this is my project now, focusing, in some ways on fathering versus mothering, but also the idea of parenting, kind of all three of those things. So the story is called Four-Way Stop. Did you even want to be a father? He stopped in the doorway with the bag of groceries. Sarah stood by the car, swaying with little Henry in her arms, while an unseen woodpecker worked aggressively along one side of the house. David couldn't pinpoint exactly what prompted Sarah's remark, but figured grabbing the bag, rather than unstrapping their child, had done it. Inside the house, Sarah put Henry in his bouncer, where the boy hopped joyfully, drooling on his monkey bib. The woodpecker was even louder inside, hammering on their siding with the force of a power tool. I know, David said. I'll do something about it. Put up a slab of cedar, maybe. Sarah peered at David and repeated her question. Neither of them had slept a full night in more than 2 seasons, and Sarah had it worse, of course, with nursing and all. He knew he should apologize for grabbing the groceries, should offer comfort instead of justification. But in that moment, his capillaries seized, his skin prickled. For the better part of 8 months, David had helped in every way he could, cooking meals, cleaning dishes, cleaning bathrooms, laundry, and yes, hauling groceries from car to house. So he didn't back down, didn't comfort, and instead ruddered away from apology into deeper ocean. Gesturing at the grocery bag he just set down, David said, "You forgot almonds and toothpaste and compost bags. I'll have to go back to the store now." Sarah stood firm. "Look at Henry. Pick him up without me having to hand him to you. It's not complicated, David. You can do this if you want." David began listing the ways he helped, but Sarah interrupted. We don't need a butler. We need a father. This time, David threw open the front door. He drove fast, at one point pounding the wheel and accidentally engaging the horn. A jogger who'd paused to stretch his quads looked up, glaring. David drove on. Maybe this time he would keep driving. What did Sarah expect? He'd done all he could. For the 8 months of Henry's life, David had labored, in the house and out. He provided. So wasn't that a father? But even in his agitated state, David knew that he didn't have the answer, and that this missing knowledge, this great unknown, was in fact a hole threatening to eat him entirely. His mother had raised him alone, but of course it hadn't struck David until the birth of his own son that he had no idea what to do. What was a father? Aside from television and fairy tales, aside from biology, David came up blank. Whenever Sarah handed Henry to him, David's knees wobbled and queasiness set in, like he was about to faint and drop their son on the floor. No. Better to act in the background or not at all. The store was only a mile from their house, and midway, a four-way stop split the trip from home side to store side. The rhythm of four-way stops was built into David. He knew exactly the sequence. First, the car to his right, which had been starting through the intersection when David arrived. Then David, with the car to the left, having arrived along with David, following after him. Everything went as it should, all drivers following the beautiful alternating code. David felt somewhat calmer. This is what he knew: circuits, logistics, the satisfaction of a system that worked. At the store, he located the needed items quickly, another familiar circuit. He used the lower floor self-checkout, no lines down there. The errand took 5 minutes tops. Almonds, toothpaste, compost bags. Leaving the store, David drove in the direction away from home. The background, or not at all. But a red light near the interstate created just enough pause for him to reconsider. And he turned, heading back the way he'd come. Before long, he arrived again at the four-way stop, a moment before the Lexus across from him. As his foot lifted from the brake pedal, he saw the Lexus jerk forward, blinker suddenly on. Knowing it was the other driver who must let up, must recognize David had the right of way, he refrained from stomping the brake, held his forward cruise. But the Lexus made no adjustment, continued full speed, and crashed into David. Just before impact, he glimpsed the driver, a mess of dark hair, one hand on the wheel. Immediately after, David took stock. All 4 limbs intact, no taste of blood, almonds everywhere. He was in the middle of the intersection, surrounded by a corona of glass and plastic. He cursed, hit the flashers, and got out. Hesitant cars approached the four-way, a driver or two rolling down their windows to ask if he needed help, expressing shock at the scene. "I saw him plow right into you," someone said. "We're witnesses," another offered. "Can we help?" David waved them on, knowing what Sarah would probably say. "Of course you need help. Don't be such a man." David began directing traffic himself. "Need me to call someone?" a laborer in a pickup said. "The cops," David said, and the man nodded as he rolled away. Only then did David think about the other driver, who hadn't exited his car yet. Few things infuriated David more than drivers who didn't or couldn't or wouldn't follow stop sign code. Maybe drivers who switched on their left-hand blinker at the last minute, or slammed the brakes for pedestrians where there was no crosswalk, as Sarah sometimes did, and not because he felt cars should rule the road, or that he thought he always knew best, but because in order for a system to work, it needed to run unimpeded. Electrical circuits, blood in veins, roads. A system clogged, messed with. Such things ruined efficiency and made everything worse. And no, Sarah, it's not machismo. Probably, David considered. It was closer to finickiness. A desire that everything be in its place. And wasn't that, in the classical, hierarchical, patriarchal sense, more of a female trait? As David stood directing traffic, an octogenarian in a Camry inched through the intersection, hunched over the wheel in dark fit-overs. He circumvented the wreck in the middle without looking up, appearing not to notice the scene, or if he did notice, he took it entirely in stride. David peered after him, following the driver's slow progress down the road. When he turned at the next block and disappeared from view, David realized he was now staring at the other driver, the one who T-boned him, still in the Lexus. He was a teenager, with floppy black hair reminiscent of the artsy or rebellious member of a boy band. David hated him immediately. The hair, the crash, the dopey expression, it was too much. Why wasn't he moving? Exit the car, roll down your window, something. David bent over to get a better look. The kid peered at him through the window. David made a roll it down gesture, but the kid just kept staring. David approached, carefully stepping through bits of glass and plastic. He tapped the window. The kid looked around as if trying to locate something, and then finally, the window came down. David wanted to shake the effete look off the kid's face. But before David could do or say anything further, the kid broke down. Hands to face, sobbing the whole show. David suddenly felt every driver that rolled slowly through the intersection was watching him with this crying kid. He looked at David through the open window. I didn't see you. I thought, I can't believe this. What's going to happen? The tone was beseeching, his expression desperate. Look, David said. Are you okay? I think so. Can you move your toes? The kid scrunched his face, shifting in the seat. He mumbled something, and by instinct, David leaned closer. You'll be just fine, he said. How old are you, son? He'd said it without thinking. The words just came out. Son. The kid was terrified and looking to David for help. The kid was sobbing now. My mom's car, he managed to say. David repeated his question. Keep him talking. David recalled that bit of advice from some long ago course or experience. Keep them talking so they don't pass out. The kid tried to smile but faltered midway. 16, I just turned 16. David kept asking questions. The kid answered, grimacing but able to speak. His name was Walter. This was his mother's car. They lived nearby. His father was overseas in the Air Force and hadn't been home in almost a year. It was just he and his mom now. David hoped the guy in the pickup had called the police. His own phone was back in the car, forgotten in his initial adrenalized reactions to the accident. But David knew he shouldn't leave the kid. Not now. He reached his hand through the open window and pressed it against the boy's bony shoulder. You'll be all right, Walter. I'm not going anywhere. Soon there were sirens. A fire truck, tow truck, 2 police SUVs, red, blue, orange lights. It had started to drizzle, and someone official was now directing traffic. Men and women in dark blue uniforms had taken charge. David gave his statement, watching as they hitched his car to the tow. Wait, he said suddenly. I need to get my things. While the mechanic watched, David leaned into the angled car, salvaging what almonds he could and tossing them with the toothpaste into a compost bag, along with the roll of remaining bags. The officer who'd been taking David's statement smiled knowingly. Can't forget the goods, right? Firefighters gathered around the Lexus, obscuring David's view, but he thought Walter was still inside. Will the kid be okay? David asked a nearby officer. Yes, we'd think so, she said, but her attention was on something else, some other detail of the scene. And that's all she said. When they asked if he needed a ride, David was already walking away with his bag. He moved slowly at first, conscious of slick pavement. Then he jogged for a block, before finally running full bore, slipping danger be damned. Lungs pumped air at capacity, arteries working alongside. He was heading home.
Thank you, Greg. I can't stop thinking about that first time that David didn't back down, he didn't comfort. And that connection with when we get to that four-way stop and it's just the Lexus needs to know their turn. And when we get to the tapping of the glass and this question that keeps ringing, what is a father? What does a father do? And thank you. I could say so many things, but thank you for this tremendous reading and for, I know that your teaching comes out in our workshops. You're always teaching everyone else and leading us through whatever we're going through. So thank you. I can't imagine this cohort without you, without any one of you. So thank you.